Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Today we're looking at Go for Broke, which was made in 1951.
It follows a single platoon of the 442nd Infantry Regiment. The 442 was originally formed as a regimental combat team in February 43 and then quickly grew. And what makes the unit unique is it's entirely composed of Japanese Americans.
Yep.
So they're second generation Japanese Americans largely. And they're serving in the US military, while in a lot of cases, many of them have family in the Japanese American internment camps. So it kind of gives the film a really unique sort of aspect to the war.
And then chose to fight for the side that was incarcerating them. It's quite...
Exactly.
It's a very moral conundrum there, isn't it, really?
It's fascinating because, just to jump ahead, like one of my favourite scenes is where two of the platoon members chat about their family, and one of them is talking about the camps in quite a bit of detail, and he's explaining like the circumstances that the families are living in, like six families to a hut, but they're partitioned so they have a bit of privacy. I visited the Buffalo Bill Center of the West in Wyoming, and Wyoming had one of the actual internment camps. They had a recreation of one of the huts that they stayed in. And there was a really interesting exhibit there. And it just showed sort of like the confines that they were living in and how thin the walls were. And Wyoming winters are really cold, apparently. So you just got to wonder what the conditions in those camps were like. Yeah,
it must have been very nice.
But we should get back to the film.
Yeah, of course. No, it's always good to talk about history. So the cast, you've got Van Johnson. The reason that he's in it will become apparent later on. He plays Lieutenant Michael Grayson. He's the new CEO on the block.
Yeah, he's just been made up from like sergeant, hasn't he?
And he's
into a second lieutenant or something like that.
That's it. And he's coming from a Texas regiment, who was a National Guard regiment, and he's quite upset.
Yeah, there's a little bit of exposition. They explain where he's from, what his unit is. I
was at the 36th Infantry Division, Texas National Guard unit that he wanted to leave. He's a bit upset about that, but he was expecting to go back to his own unit, wasn't he? Yeah, and then the great thing about this movie, as Battleground, well, say it now, Van Johnson's from Battleground. That's what we know him from on this pod. So much like Battleground that Van Johnson stars in before, this movie also has a lot of veterans
from the actual regiment itself.
Yeah, from the regiment. You've got Lane Nakano, who plays Sam. Later on, he became a famous singer. You've got George Mickey, who plays Chick. You've got Akira Fukunaga, who plays Frank.
Ken Akutoma and Henry Ozayasato, who plays Takashi Ohara.
That's it. And Harry Hamada as Mazami. All those lads are genuine vets from the time. And I think when we watch the movie, it really shows, because their movement, the way that they react to gunfire, just the way that they act in uniform is very real, very believable. I'm not looking at Van Johnson. Sometimes is a bit prim and proper, and he's a little bit poster boyish, isn't he? But these lads, a
little clunky at points.
Yeah, just a bit. But these, the actual, you can tell they've all done it all before. Just the way they wear their equipment, the way they move, the way they talk to each other, you can just tell they've been in theatre. Always brings that extra layer of authenticity,
doesn't it? Well, it's interesting because the platoon has this sort of like dynamic that comes across really nicely on screen. It doesn't feel forced, doesn't feel too sort of like written. It doesn't. They seem to be all on the same wavelength, and they know what they're going for within the scenes. And
it's the dialogue, isn't it, between them all?
Yeah.
I think there's a sequence where the guy moves, I think he moves his helmet or moves his hat, and there's a picture of his girl. And the guy's like, "Oh, if I had a girl like that, you wouldn't make me volunteer. You'd have to drag me out," sort of thing. And I think, that's how guys would talk to each other, Like I wouldn't leave home.
Like we said in our episode on Battleground. Check that out if you haven't already, guys.
Yes, please do.
We talked about the writing in that, and this film's written by it's written and directed by Robert Pirosh.
Yep.
Who wrote Battleground. and we commented on the believability that the feel and the vibe that the dialogue in that film created, and we get sort of the same thing with Go for Broke.
Yeah, you really do. And it's written, obviously, so by Robert Pirosh, who was in the Battle of the Ardennes, so he's seen action as well. So again, this film is very true to life. He's writing from his experiences. I assume, as he did with Battleground, there's a lot of downtime and a lot of quick frantic action, and that's how it can be sometimes. There's periods of a lot of downtime doing nothing. There's like frantic 5 minutes of everything.
There's stretches of just normal life within camp or on the move.
Yeah, just them lazing about.
Those little bits of those little set pieces of action.
MGM, same studio that released Battleground as well, and the same cinematography by Paul C. Vogel, who won an Oscar for Battleground. So, the cinematography in this movie is still
there's some really beautifully set up shots in this film.
Really holds up.
There's a nice mix of outdoor filming, some soundstage stuff, and some contemporary footage is included as well. So there's some nice montages of artillery fire and troops on the move, that kind of thing.
I'd put a pint on the town, the French town being the same town as Battleground. It's got that weird slopey road.
Yeah, I think it curves down.
Yeah, I think it might be the same.
Probably just one of those little towns they have built on one of the
probably is.
backlots.
Yeah, probably still go there.
Perhaps. I'm not an expert on that, so
we'll have to go and be like, "Have you got the town from Battleground?" We don't want to see Disneyland. We want to see the town from Battleground.
So getting back to the plot of the film, Grayson's introduced, and he's not expecting to be in the 442. He's not expecting to be in a unit made up of Japanese Americans.
No.
And there's a significant element of bigotry to his character when he's introduced. He does a good job of hiding it.
Yeah, it's very subtle, isn't it? It's very subtle.
He sort of, when he meets his commanding officer, he sort of says, "No, I wanted to be in the 36th, not in this regiment, not in this unit." And the CO has obviously experienced this sort of thing before, and he sort of guesses that Van Johnson has a little bit of this bigotry, and he doesn't want to be basically commanding a platoon of Japanese Americans. He just wants to be commanding Texans. That comes through, but obviously he isn't. He can't be transferred out, so he's stuck with the 442, and he takes on the platoon. And there's a great little training montage of
that seems great.
To know each other.
Yeah, I love that.
That's one of the best montages that I've seen.
The time that he first meets them all in their barracks, he just loses it, doesn't he? He's like, this isn't right. This isn't right. You've got.
He's putting them all on a charge.
Yeah,
basically,
he gets annoyed. There's dust behind one of the wooden supporting beams in the barracks, and it's really picking on these guys. And I think that's, for me, I was like, oh, okay, if they were Texans, he wouldn't probably would let that all slide. Analyzing that scene again, I was like, hang on, is that his prejudice coming through, or is that him actually trying to drill these men? You're never quite sure.
Yeah, well, I mean,
early stage,
when his CO tells him to go and find Sergeant O'Hara, and he gets visibly excited when he hears an Irish name, and he assumes it's going to be an Irish American, or it's going to be basically going to be another white guy.
That's it. Yeah, it's Takashi.
It's a Japanese American, and he has to sort of accept this over time, doesn't he? And he puts his men through the ringer.
And it shows them going from these sort of raw recruits, shall we say, to the sort of well trained drilled unit. And it's it's a nice. It reminded me of Full Metal Jacket, sort of that sort of scene of them becoming soldiers. I liked it, and the comedy came through as well, where they were using each other as stairs to get over that big wall.
Yeah, I was about to mention that. So they're trying to get over a wall obstacle, aren't they, on an assault course, and they just can't do it. He manages to do it first, jumps the wall, no bother. But they can't do it. But they basically sort of form a human step, and they all get over, and then the last two men just sort of run around the edge before he spots them.
Yeah,
which is a really nice little comedic element.
It's funny, but also I think it's a bit trying to be mean, saying that because they're shorter. You get all the jokes within the movie of them being shorter than than Van Johnson.
Well, so when we meet Tommy for the first time, there's a great sort of side by side shot of them. Where Van Johnson is towering above Tommy, who's the smallest man in the platoon.
Yeah,
and Tommy's in a mismatch of kit, and he's wearing a service jacket with his sleeves rolled up.
Yeah, and he's got leggings, got gaiters on.
Got gaiters to hold his pants up and stuff like that. It's just because they didn't have clothes small enough when they issued them out. which is really fascinating. I mean, that's a nice little hint at issues that unit probably did and would have faced.
Yeah, they would have had. Yeah, I mean, I don't, I know in wartime you don't want to make like 10 versions of something because it's just expensive. But these lads must have had extra issues getting kit, and it's nice the movie does touch on it. I think it touches on things quite well for the time period. You think of the early 50s, it's still a time of segregation. It's still a time of civil unrest and things like that in the States. So, I think it actually deals with these issues quite well for its time. I mean, maybe now you might look at it
to jump ahead, it sort of does that sort of trope where begrudgingly sort of accepts them for who they are.
Yeah, he does.
So he begins by othering them, and he's got prejudices and
he keeps wanting to leave and join the other unit.
Through the training and their first time in action, he sort of begrudgingly becomes appreciative of them as soldiers.
Yeah, and their divisional commander as well. He knows that the troops are good, and he's trying to subtly say to Grayson, like, look, these guys are good at their jobs. You're just prejudiced against them.
You've got to give them a chance.
Exactly. And then through combat and through the movie, they more than so prove themselves in the face of battle. Than that.
Yeah, I mean, its tone is arguably a little ahead of its time.
Yeah, I think so.
I would say.
Yeah, I think you're right.
One of the interesting things that jumped to my mind was the context that the film's being made in. It's released in May 51.
Mm-hmm.
So we're about a year into the Korean War.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm wondering if Pirosh wrote it with perhaps rising anti-Asian sentiment within the US.
Yeah,
possibly. In mind,
possibly.
In the context of fighting North Korea. So it's another Asian enemy. Maybe there was some sort of like thought about perhaps through this film we can sort of address some of these anti-Asian sentiments.
Yeah, and also show that in the last war, we all pulled together and fought a common enemy. So maybe that's what he's going for in this one.
Basically, the units they're kind of eager to get into the field, but they're also kind of eager. Some of them are hoping to get to the Pacific to fight the Japanese, which is a really interesting dynamic in itself. And as I mentioned earlier, there's that really interesting conversation between Tommy and I think is it Sam?
Yeah, I think so.
Tommy basically explains to Sam that he's from Hawaii and both of his parents were killed during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Phenomenally powerful when you think about it. So you have this second generation Japanese American that wants to go and fight Japan to avenge, his parents that have been killed. That's a really interesting dynamic. Sam explains that his parents and family are all in internment camps.
The themes and things, it really makes you think. I think for a movie of this time, a lot of them are just B-movie sort of shtick. They don't try and tackle actual issues like this, and actual systematic sort of prejudices and things that have been,
you can definitely tell that Go for Broke's trying to address issues.
Yeah, whether it does it well enough is for another sort of podcast, but I think for a war movie, it definitely does a real good job. I think of actually trying it's trying to just show the history of this regiment.
Yeah, which is a fascinating regiment in itself.
I mean, gosh, name a medal they didn't win. Oh my
most
my
decorated
word,
unit of its size. In U.S. military history. That's amazing.
No one can turn around and say, "Although, why are you making a film about these lads? What do they do?" It's like, well, you look at the medals.
Completely deserved.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes from Italy to France to near Germany.
Basically, it basically follows them all the way through right to late 44, like on the Rhine.
And just from a film point of view, I mean, like the scale of it is really impressive. I believe they were in Italy, and then when they switched to France, they were we're in France.
One of the things I liked that signposted that was Van Johnson gets these little booklets. They're like a guide to Italy.
Yeah, they were great.
Guide to France.
Yeah,
and he's sort of like there's a narration and overdub of him reading some of them, and some of them are kind of like humorous, where he's like, "And you'll be delivered breakfast in your room, and you might not be used to the French rail carriages, etc." And it's just these little things that sort of signpost.
But then there's a bit where his sort of redemption arc comes in, where he gets the one for Italy and he starts reading it, and it's all about, look, the Italian people are not what you think they're going to be like. Actually, they're like this, and and then he sort of looks over at his men and he's like, oh, hang on a minute, like I felt this is exactly how I'm like with them. So he does have a redemption arc, which is actually quite good. It's not fantastic. I don't think it's that great.
It's a little forced.
It's a bit hackney.
The unit goes to Italy. They fight their way through Italy. They gain a reputation for being a good combat unit. Yep. They are transferred to France once the invasion has taken place, and they fight their way through France. By that point, Grayson's been transferred as a liaison officer.
Yeah, well, he says, doesn't he? He says, like, oh, if ever I get the chance, his commanding officer says, whenever I get the chance, I'll transfer you, because you obviously hate it here.
And interestingly, by that point, he doesn't want to be transferred.
No, he doesn't want to. He respects him.
He's completely, accepted and has changed his opinions of the 442. So he's been transferred out, and it's kind of rushed. There's a scene where he meets one of his old squad mates, a Sergeant Cully, who's played by Don Haggerty. He meets in a bar, and at that point, the 442 and the 36th are sort of working together as a regimental combat team division. Cully's like mouthing off about, I don't want our artillery being provided by the 442 or, the Japs.
Oh, those damn Japs,
Yeah, and Grayson takes him outside, and they basically he confronts him about his bigotry.
Yeah.
Which is the point in the film where, it sort of like flips it. So Van Johnson's character is like, he's realized that he was bigoted.
That's it, yeah.
It's painful to see his previous bigotry reflected back to him by his old friend.
And they have the most 50s fight ever. Van has the best punch and lays the man out.
Exactly.
But it's very much like you might as well just blow his knuckles off after he's punched him. It's like it's a bit slapstick.
Yeah, there might as well be some pow sounds going on there. But...
I think there is. Yeah, it's like you're punching meat. Like Rocky Hams. It's just like what the heck.
So after his fight with Cully, it transitions into the last act of the film is a significant battle, and there's a unit that's pinned down, and Grayson basically leaves his position and sort of flanks around to try and find a way around them. It's at that point sort of like Cully comes with him, and he sees the 442 in action, and he realizes that he's been bigoted. And that's where that clunky sort of
is a bit
payoff of Grayson's arc comes in, where Cully is talking to I think it's Sam, and he explains that, oh yeah, he slugged me once because I thought you were.
It's very it's very macho man 40s talking,
Grayson's not so bad after all.
It's kind of, but he did kind of just sod off and leave us at the first opportunity, even though you sort of did it once, so he was okay with it anyway. I think it's a little bit okay.
Johnson's character is really interesting in this film because he's at once a good officer and also a particularly bad officer. So he does lead his men by example when he does the the training montage, and he's running them through the long distance marches and the assault courses, etc. But then once he's in the field, there's a scene where he asks his men to cover for him while he sort of fraternizes with an Italian lady. And then his entire unit moves on, and he's left being AWOL. It's just kind of a jarring scene.
The whole middle sequence of the movie is just a bit slow for me. I mean, we might talk about things we didn't like later on, but I feel like you could cut out a lot of it, and it's not any sort of putting down on the 442 or anything like that. It's just, as a movie,
it's just a little bit of
pacing.
Film,
the pacing's a bit off. But anyway, I think we'll leave that for later on.
It actually follows them all the way home, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It shows at the very end of the movie the actual 442 receiving the presidential unit citation from President Truman.
Truman, yeah, which is really nice. I think they could have recreated that. That'd been nice to see. Good to see it though. I liked it.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
My alley tally this week is, it's not necessarily one thing, because the movie's quite light on action. Not in a bad way, it's just there isn't many actiony scenes. But it's just nice to see all the different types of American kit on display. There's a BAR gunner with BAR gunner pouches.
Yeah.
And not only does he have BAR pouches on, he's got a Mackinac coat on. Whenever do you see a Mackinac coat? The subtle changes between fighting in the summer months with their M41 jackets to then fighting in the woods where they've got all their greatcoats on and scarves and things. It's just subtle, but it moves the plot along nicely. And
the kit is very good.
Yeah. it just helps to like show you where you are. You know, when they're in
it's
Italy.
not that bare minimum that you sometimes see in lower budget films where it's just like a handful of pouches on a belt, and you know that's it.
And ration boxes as well, things like that.
Exactly,
you know?
like proper ration boxes and that kind of thing.
I think that's where for me the connection between Battleground showed a lot, because that movie had really good accuracy in it.
Yeah, it's that attention to detail.
Yeah, you know, the Garand ping isn't ramped up to 500. You know, not every single Garand clip pings, things like that. You know, just and the way the men move and everything like that. You know, them being vets, them having served, really serves this movie. You know, they don't just run to the next bit of cover. They make sure they crouch and run quick, you know, in a certain way. You know, when the BAR gun is firing, he has his hand on the stock sometimes to steady himself. It was difficult to pick out a single piece of kit, but for me, I always love seeing that in movies because I just love the attention to detail. You know, it doesn't have to be that nice, but it just adds an extra layer for me. So Matt, what about you this week?
There's a lot in there, like you say. I mean, the BAR is really cool. Like it's really interesting to see a BAR well handled.
Oh yeah, I mean, he knows what he's doing, that guy.
And the cinematography takes advantage of that. There's some really nice scenes that have been laying down fire with the BAR.
Yeah. It's George Mickey is the BAR gunner.
Yeah, Chick. I think.
Chick, that's the one. Yeah,
isn't it? Yeah. Well, for me, there's a couple of picks, and they're all firearms this week. So
of course, you're the firearms guy.
I know we're the term alley by just picking cool kit from the film.
It's fine.
But that's what the alley tally is.
It's our sequence. We do what we want.
So my pick is the inclusion of a G43.
Oh, but yeah, I mean, you never see them, do you? Rarely.
It's super rare. And when I watched it for the first time, I was kind of shocked. I was like, is that a G43? So if you're not familiar, a G43 or Gewehr 43 is the German semi-automatic full caliber rifle, kind of their equivalent to the Garand.
The Garand, yeah.
And it's very rare that you see them in films. So it was really interesting to sort of like have it in that scene. And it's in a scene set in Italy. A couple of the guys have been to pick up water for the rest of the platoon.
Yep.
And they run into some members of another Japanese-American unit, the 100th. And they're chatting, they're drinking
wine,
juice.
Aren't they? That's it, yeah.
And all of a sudden, from the wreckage of a building or a barn, two Germans open up on them. A guy with a submachine gun, which we'll get to in a second.
Oh God, yeah.
There's a guy with the G43. And it's really interesting. The dynamic of that scene is really odd.
Yeah,
the Germans would never have opened up, and the way that the men move up the hill through the vines is really good.
I like that bit. That bit redeems that scene. Yeah,
the Germans would never have like tried to play whack-a-mole.
It's a bit, isn't it? I think about it. It's really whack-a-mole. Yeah, I think it's filmed so you can have that nice shot of them coming up the hill. Not necessarily.
It's a really beautiful shot.
It's a lovely shot. Like obviously you've got Vogel's doing his work there, but when they see the men moving up, it's like they know where they're going to be because it's been blocked. The scene's been blocked.
Yeah.
So it's just good blocking. But I'm like, well, no, if I'm pointing in one direction, I'm not necessarily going to see a man in my peripheral vision coming up, sneaking up on me.
Exactly. And it's very unlikely that two Germans would have opened up on a squad of American soldiers.
5 guys, something like that in that scene?
Yeah.
5 or 4 of them?
It's 5 guys. The most interesting thing about the scene is the weapons. So you have that G43. And we get some really nice like close-up shots of it too, which is
you do. And there's a shot where they've got them, and it's nicely laid on the little bit of cover, like it's almost like an advert for the G43. It's like, look what we've got, guys. We've got a G43. Look at how cool it is.
The mystery in that scene is the submachine gun that the German officer has.
It's very weird.
I can't pin down. It's supposed to be an MP40.
Yeah.
And some sources suggest that it's a rising M55 that's been sort of like mocked up to look like an MP40.
Yeah, that's what I found out.
Has the MP40's folding stock? Has that sort of like the underbarrel rim, the rib of the MP40?
It's like they just welded bits of metal to it.
There's no front sight.
That's really odd, isn't it?
So yeah, it's kind of bizarre.
And it shows up later on as well. And you get a better.
It shows up in the scene where they attack a German HQ.
That's it. Yeah, it's like on the where the ruins are. Yeah, those ruins. But then you don't see it in the mountain scenes where they relieve the hundreds.
So in the final act, the battle in the final act, you don't see it at all. In fact, they make pains to sort of like show a gun.
We've got a real MP40
with a real MP40.
It's just odd. Maybe they were shot on, obviously clearly different locations, but maybe they were shot completely different armorers or something.
Availability
could have been. It's an odd gun. You never get a good enough look at it either.
I was going to say, you don't get a close enough look at it to sort of like go, oh, that's definitely this.
Here's one for the FOF listeners. You can watch this movie for free. It's public domain, so don't worry. Look this scene up. Tell us on Twitter @FightingOnFilm what the heck you think this gun is, because we want to work it out. Because do Matt's head in. If not, he'll have to write a thesis on it or something.
It could be an M55. It could be,
but it doesn't look right.
Anyway, so that's one of my picks. That's two of my picks. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to talk about a lot of weapons today.
That's fine. The alley tally is anything, isn't it? It's fine.
It's a free for all excuse to talk about anything cool. A lot of BAR action that we've already mentioned, which is great. No Thompsons though.
No Thompsons. Nice M1 carbine though that Van has, and he has his proper M1 carbine pouches and everything else. That's nice to see, I guess.
Detail once again.
Yeah, weirdly no Thompsons, but then maybe they were never issued with them. I don't know.
In some war movies you'll have an entire squad with Thompsons.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough.
Completely, at realms of sort of like fantasy, but I think the representation that they show with the M1 carbines, the M1 Garands, and the BAR, very very plausible, very believable. Probably the likely loadout for the platoon at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen photos of 442nd in theatre, and some of them even got Springfields. So. Yeah. I'm like, this is like 44 onwards. So it's like, I'm assuming you just get issued what you get issued with. For me, the alley tally is quite light this week. For me, at least, purely because the lack of sort of battle scenes. And I wanted to save a battle scene for my favourite bit. I mean, the favourite scene for me is when the squad are walking down this little road in Italy. And it's like a dust track, and there's some Roman pillars in the ground, like broken ones, relics. Yeah. And he goes, "Oh, you can tell they're Roman because of the pillars." And then this machine gun opens up, and they all like run off the road and take cover. And I like that shot, lovely little shot.
Yeah, it's good.
And it cuts to sort of the mortar team sort of putting fire onto this MG position.
Yeah.
And you got Van saying like, "Little over to the left, little over to the right." Like I can't do Van Johnson's voice. But no, I just like it because it shows the mortar being used like in a really close combat role, and I like to see that. I just love mortars anyway. I think they're really cool. And then one of the lads,
you rarely see them in films, and you definitely don't see. So it's an M2 60mm mortar, and it's from the weapons squad.
Yep.
Probably detached from the weapons platoon. So each US Army company at that point had a weapons platoon and had heavier weapons like heavy mortars and 60mm mortars. So it's really rare that you see that anyway in a film.
But it's
nice that they show it ranging in and also pinning down the Germans.
That's it. And equally, like, got someone spotting for them as well. And then one of them gets injured. And then the sort of, he brings the mortar up closer, but he brings it without its little mount. He puts some...
It's Tommy, isn't it? The littlest.
Tommy, that's it, yeah. Well. Yeah, because he always gets grief off of Van Johnson for being short. Because even when
he's been shot in the leg.
That's it, yeah. But even when they run up to help, he goes, "Oh, not you. You stay there." But he shows grace in what he's made of, because in the end, he brings up the mortar close enough to get a good shots off. But he's injured, and he uses his helmet as a makeshift. Is it plinth? Mortar plinth?
Yeah, it's the base plate of the mortar base.
Yeah. Oh, plinth sounds better. Let's put on mortars on plinths, guys.
The listeners all know what you mean.
Yeah, they know what I mean. The bit you put the gun on, the tube. Sorry, the bit you put the tube.
Quite right, tube.
So he gets a shot off. But all in the while, you get these nice sequences of the Germans firing back. And there's a really sexy looking MG42 with a drum mag on it. Really nice to see that.
You rarely see a drum mag on there as well.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a nice little addition, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And then in the end, they destroy the Germans thing, and then they sort of turn the MG42 round on the escaping Germans. Absolutely light up an Opel Blitz, don't they?
Yeah, pepper a truck.
Absolutely light it up. But it's just a really nice little sequence again. Sort of does action like Battleground did action. It was a lot of sort of men in the field, and then, as I said at the start, 5 minutes of frantic action, and those scenes are shot really nicely.
There's a nice dynamic flow to them.
There's
a nice mix of close-ups and wide shots that I think conveyed the emotion of the men that are fighting.
But I think as well that scene might be the start of Van Johnson's redemption arc, because he's not been in combat with them yet properly.
True.
In the movie sense.
True.
And then when the German officer comes out, who I think's the same officer as the one that was shooting at him in the vineyard, convinced it might have been the same bloke.
Could have been.
Yeah. But he's like, oh, so soldiers, what are they? You know, like really shocked.
He's surprised to see Japanese.
Really is, yeah. I mean, you would be, wouldn't you?
You'd be confused.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, didn't Hitler tell you the Japanese have surrendered and now they're fighting with us?
That's a great pick, because I love when Tommy sort of like fills his helmet.
It's really good
to make that makeshift base.
Really good.
And it's just a really nice scene. It's just a clever, and you so rarely see mortars,
especially used being in like a proper close fire support role as well.
So great pick.
Yeah. So Matt, what's your fave this week?
I've got a couple. Like my first favorite has to be that shot of the final battle, the opening of it, where the camera sort of emerges through a couple of trees, and then it looks over the precipice of a cliff. Down below is a forest, and you can see shells landing, and explosions.
Yeah, that's
it's
a nice
just a
scene.
really beautifully framed
really
shot.
Good. Yeah, and you're not quite sure what you're looking at until the shell fire starts going off. It's really nice. You know, and that's the cinematography coming through again.
Yeah, it's Vogel working his magic, isn't it? It's
really
just
good.
A really nice shot. And then in amongst that sort of sequence, there's another couple of nice bits where they blow a tree down, they blow some trees down to make a path for a tank.
Yep.
But there's also a tree that gets blown down by a shell, and it lands over a trench, and that's the kind of practical effect that you don't see a lot in films of the year. And sometimes it's a little bit lazy. They just like let off a few explosions in the background.
It's the attention to detail, I think, that this movie has.
It is. It's that attention to detail.
Yeah.
You're right. There's one little scene that I loved, which isn't a battle scene. It's one of the men's wounded, and he's taken back to an aid station, and he's holding his rosary in his hand, and the chaplain comes over, who's played by Hugh Beaumont, and the chaplain's trying to comfort the wounded, and he comes over and he says, "I'm glad to see that you have some comfort. I'm here if you need me." Looking at the rosary, and the wounded member of the 442 basically explains, "I'm not Catholic, Father. I'm Buddhist. This is a Buddhist
different
rosary.
Kind of rosaries, isn't he?"
Yeah. I think they're called a Japamala.
Yeah.
And he's, it's just that really nice sort of like little inclusion that gets across the differences between these men. But the chaplain just turns to him and says, "Shout me if you need me." There's no sort of like,
he's not going to try and convert him or anything like that. Or how dare you? It's like,
it's just one of these little scenes that is quite clever. It's really cleverly written. It's a nice touch, and that's
I like
that's one of my other favorites.
I think there's a joke that I'd sort of liked it not in a like a mean way, but I thought it did make me laugh. When they're digging their foxholes and they go up to start the relief effort, and this trooper comes along and he jumps in the slit trench the guy's dug, and he's like, when the Texans, he's like, "You know what I don't like about these hundredth guys? These are the four second guys," and he goes, "Oh, what?" He goes, "Oh, they don't dig them long enough," and he just starts digging like he's deeper down. I just really made me laugh. I like it.
and that plays in nicely as well to show that the attitudes towards
them have changed.
Yeah, exactly. Within the division, they've sort of accepted them. The worst that they do is they don't dig scrapes long enough.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like a big issue, is it? So Matt, any final thoughts this week on Go for Broke?
I enjoyed it almost more than Battleground.
Wow.
Actually.
Wow.
Because I found the additional layer of complexity that the story of the 442 brings to it almost more interesting than the tale of Bastogne.
Okay. Is it because maybe Bastogne's been a bit, not overdone, but like you had a bit of Bastogne fatigue? Maybe.
Perhaps, I mean, perhaps it being a story that I'm not as familiar with gives it something fresh to me. I mean, perhaps that's the case. But I found it really interesting, the dynamics that they were trying to get across between the sort of shift from bigotry to, acceptance that Grayson has. And also sort of the portrayal of the men was interesting too. It showed them as equals. It showed them as soldiers. It showed them as being, interesting characters. They weren't a plot device.
Yeah, I like
which is
much
exactly
preferred their sequences than I did Van Johnson's sequences.
Yeah,
much preferred.
I don't mind Van Johnson in this film, but he's not particularly interesting.
No, I find him
outside of the development of his character.
I don't know, man. After watching a few Van Johnson movies now, I kind of give or take him. I think I'm not trying to be overly critical of his acting abilities. You know, he's a massive star in the 50s. That can't be denied. But it's like he has two acting styles. It's like disgruntled or surprised. And
I think the benefit of Battleground is it's more of an ensemble piece.
Yeah, and he's barely in it, to be fair. Like,
whereas
in Battleground,
with Go for Broke, he's sort of like there's the ensemble of the platoon, and then there is Van Johnson's interaction with the ensemble of the platoon.
There's too much, like, initially. I mean, not later on, there's less of him, but like initially, it's like just Van's sort of exploits. And I'm like, I don't particularly care about Lieutenant Grayson trying to find the Texans. I think that's actually quite irritating. You know, I think it's meant to irritate you, but I'm like, I'd rather know
there's
what.
That weird scene where he sort of like runs into a town while the train sort of like paused for a moment, that they're on the way to somewhere up the line, and he runs through the village to find someone playing the piano and singing a Texan song.
That's it, yeah.
And you just think, why is this in the film?
It's just a bit. It needs to be. I could, like as I was saying earlier before we started to record, like I feel like I could cut about 20 minutes out of this, and you wouldn't notice. You know, mainly you'd be cutting out Grayson. Maybe back in the 50s, you know, maybe because he was a big star, people would have been a bit more engaged. But watching it a few days ago for the pod, he just grated on me a little bit. Someone else could play him a little bit more. I don't know. It's a bit more sincerity with it. I don't know whether sort of Van's acting or the acting of the era sort of
someone with a little more depth and
Pirosh
might have lifted that character a little more.
But that's that's not really criticism really with it. It's a bit long.
I don't really care that Johnson's character is sort of not super important, because really the story's about the 442.
Of course,
I find the dynamic of the platoon far more interesting than his character anyway.
I think that's why I got annoyed with him, because I was like, I'd rather see what the 442 are getting up to than what Van. If you want, oh no, Van's not going to go back to his regiment. Oh no, I'm so upset. Like, I couldn't give two fucks, mate.
That's the dynamic of the film, and I think it does work. I do enjoy the film. I thought it was good. Perhaps those elements that you mentioned there come in because I think this might be actually Pirosh's first directorial effort.
Okay, that would make sense.
So that might be a sort of an issue with, you know, an inexperienced director not knowing when to cut parts that don't particularly work well with the rest of the movie, perhaps. Although he was nominated for an Oscar for this.
I don't think he does another war film, actually. I know he wrote Hell is for Heroes with Steve McQueen, but he didn't direct that.
Did he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he did. He wrote that one. That's a bit of a Thompson fest, actually. I mean, I didn't hate Go for Broke. I really enjoyed the parts, really enjoyed the parts of the 442. Wish there was more of it. You know, I know there's a remake. I've not seen the remake. Have you seen the remake?
I know it was made in 2017, but I haven't actually had a chance to see it. I know that Paul over on World War II TV, who we had on for our Wild Geese episode, is going to do a special with some of the cast and the director.
Yes, he is. So on the 25th of this month, being January 2021, Paul's having a special of the remake cast of Go for Broke on his channel, World War II TV. I mean, obviously, if you're listening to this later date, go back and watch it. I'm sure it'll be well worth your time. I mean, we're big fans of him on this pod. So I think that wraps it up for this week, Matt. I mean, I really enjoyed just getting back to the old format. We're trying to plan some nice guests coming up, things like that.
Yep, and the best way to keep up with what we are looking at and what we're going to be covering in the future is to follow us over on Twitter at Fighting on Film. It's one of the best parts of doing the pod is speaking to everyone on Twitter and getting to know what they think of the films we're covering and what we should be covering next.
Thanks everyone again for listening.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Yep, drop a like, a review, comment, subscribe on whatever you're listening to, and have a good one.
Catch you soon.
Bye.